Well, hello, and thank you very much for coming to this incredible session around the road to GEC, looking at the space sector and how do we effectively save Earth by going to space, and what are the applications for Earth that we can get from looking at the space sector. And so we've got an amazing group of panelists here. Before we get kicked off, I do want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land in which we're all on, and pay respects to elders, both past, present, and emerging. As we get kicked into this, we're going to be going around the room doing a bit of introductions. Thank you very much for those who are in attendance. We do have a chat function. Please feel free to use that and ask questions as we go through. We'll have time for Q&A at the end, as well as weaving in any conversations or discussions into the panel sessions we have now. And for those of you who are watching the recording, thank you very much, and feel free to send through your comments and conversations to the socials wherever you find us. So by way of introduction, my name is Dr. Chad Renando. I'm the Managing Director for the Global Entrepreneurship Network here in Australia, also a research fellow with the Rural Economy Center of Excellence at USQ, and CEO for Startup Status, where we're mapping and measuring the innovation ecosystem in Australia. We're preparing these sessions for the road to GEC, the Global Entrepreneurship Congress, which is happening in Melbourne from the 19th to the 24th, where we're bringing around 4,000 delegates from around the world to say how we build one global entrepreneur ecosystem. And part of that is a very specific focus on different sectors, including the space sector. And how do we do that better? And what's the role of government and industry? How do we develop the culture around it and the technologies? Heaps to dive into there. To help us with that, we've got an amazing panel of leaders here who can give us some insights. And what I would love to do is we're going to go around the Zoom room, as it were, and then I'll ask you 3 questions. And the first question is who you are. The second question is what you do. And the third question is, when you think about the space-focused innovation ecosystem, as you know it, and you can apply it both globally as well as domestically from the country that you're from, when you think about that space-focused innovation ecosystem, if you were to describe that using a vehicle, what vehicle would that be? Is it floating around here and there like a parachute? Is it just sort of trudging along like a faithful pair of tennis shoes? Is it like the proverbial rocket getting ready to launch? Is it new like a Tesla? Is it old like an old pickup or an old Ute? What is it? Is it kind of floating around here and there like a transporter or a time machine? What kind of vehicle, if you were to think of any vehicle to describe the space-focused innovation ecosystem? So I'll kick off just in my upper left. And for those who are in attendance, if you want to add your 2 bits, please feel free to put it in the chat. And Xavier, I might start with you.
All right, thank you. Everyone hears me? Yeah, all clear. Hi, I'm Xavier Kessler. I am an architect, and I work for Hassel, which is a large international architecture and design firm originated in Australia and still very active in Australia as well. I'm based in London, really. I'm just going to kind of like have introduction. I'm just going to share a couple of slides because I'm an architect. I need to kind of show stuff visually, right? So let me just do that right now. So it's only 4 slides, right? So this is the type of work we do as architects, right? Anywhere in the world, any topology as you can think of. Some might recognize the stadium there. Some might recognize some other buildings there. Some built, some under construction. Different type of topologies. I personally lead a small group, a small design innovation group from London, where I'm based. And the type of work we do is we only look at sometimes quite small work, but always very sustainable and regenerative work, right? From a very sustainable design practice. But quite often we find ourselves in extreme environments, right? We're designing a meeting pod built out of recycled plastics on a Senegalese beach. We're working on a music center in a refugee camp in northern Uganda. But we also find ourselves in very extreme environments, which is space. And there's a bits where I've kind of been specializing in the last, a little bit more than a decade. And that's in space architecture. You know, I don't call myself a space architect, I call myself an architect. I just happen to work in space. We've worked with ESA, we worked with NASA, and also with Sierra Space. We work with agencies and commercial space companies at the same time. Anything for lunar habitation, for Mars habitation, and also lower Earth orbit habitation. So that's really an intro to what I do. I'm just going to stop sharing maybe for a second. And the vehicle, that's a very tricky one. I didn't actually found the vehicle, but I think my critique always is on the space industry, that it's kind of driven by people with a very technical background, right? And it's not always open to people with different backgrounds from a design perspective, for example. I find it quite hard to kind of get into the space industry over the years, because everything is driven from an engineering perspective, right? And which is really important, but not everything needs to be right from an engineering perspective. So the vehicle that I would think about, it's going to be extremely technical, over technical, and it will be a vehicle that is not adjusted to the astronauts. It's to the people that are steering the vehicle. It'll be very, very difficult to use, and it's not human centric. That's what I think.
Thanks so much, Xavier. I do love that title, Space Architect. I know you don't call yourself one, but that is amazing. I love your description of the vehicle. Made me think of that Simpsons episode where they let Homer Simpson design the car that was definitely not customer centric, and it was highly technical, over engineered.
Maybe, yes. That'd be good. That'd be a good one, I think. Yes. Over engineered with yeah, absolutely.
That's good. Thanks for that, Xavier. Stephanie, over to you, please.
Yeah, well, hi everyone. My name is Stephanie, and I'm currently an associate director at KPMG Australia and the space industry lead. However, the views I provide this evening are my own, especially since it accumulates from a lot of my years working on international space cooperation and space policy in the US, and at NASA headquarters and the US State Department. And if you're calling yourself not a space architect, I would like to say I'm a space diplomat, but not working in government. Because I think a lot of the things I do, it's really about that cooperation and coordination side of things. And I also volunteer with the Methuselah Foundation for the NASA Deep Space Food Challenge, doing pretty much a lot of that coordination and international relations as well. And I guess I'd like to eventually call myself a space foodie, just because I like to eat, and that's how I got involved there. The last thing, since I am in Australia, despite this accent, I am based in Adelaide. I think if the Australian space sector's innovation ecosystem were a vehicle, I think it'd be a boat, because, well, space, the closest thing to space, it is, the outer space treaties with the water, the law of the sea, and I'm not saying, it's a cruise ship by any means in the Australian space industry. Maybe an inflatable boat that has an engine on it. I'm not a boat person, but I would imagine it's sturdy enough. It will get you there. And maybe some of those innovators will really add extra stuff onto their inflatable boats, but it's also small and very individual at this time. So I think there needs to be more cooperation even amongst these innovators. Thanks.
Excellent, Stephanie. Thank you very much. And I do love that space foodie title. We'll see if we can make that one a reality. And no, that boat is really interesting. And definitely needing the innovators to say, well, what, it's kind of like those challenges when you facilitate a room saying, okay, you've got a boat, now do something with it. So it'll be interesting to see if we can get that collaboration to do something with it. Emmeline, over to you, please.
Great, thank you again. Kia ora and greetings from Auckland, where I'm actually at in New Zealand. So I'm Emmeline Pat Dahlstrom, and I'm originally from the Philippines. I'm also American, and now living in New Zealand for about like 6 years. So my background, I'm trained as a physicist and a space scientist, but I'm really, I guess, just like we have memes, I think I can say that I probably call myself a space enabler or a space ecosystem builder now. And that's because I'm the CEO and co-founder of Spacebase, and Spacebase is really a purpose-driven consultancy and a social enterprise. And our real focus is to help catalyze space industries, specifically in developing and emerging countries. So that's kind of like the far-reaching goal. And we've been in New Zealand for 6 years, basically prototyping and trying to do that here with different things, from educational programs to running space competitions to advising local and national government to doing technical due diligence for investors and mentoring startups. So that's kind of like my background. And in terms of the question, yeah, it's a little hard to kind of like think about it, but I guess I'm going to preface looking at sort of the development of the global space industry and kind of like where it is today. I kind of like, I'm thinking of an electric car. So in the electric car has really been around for a while, and there's like false starts sort of like in the development of it. But like today, as you can see with any of the electric cars, you can go from 0 to 60, like from when it actually starts. And I think having been in the industry for at least like 3 decades now, we've been going on a linear path for such a long time. And then just within like maybe the past 10 or 15 years, I think we've hit the exponential curve where we're in the inflection point. And so I think that from now on, there's going to be a lot of changes and exponential changes that will happen. So it's not just the technology that's exponentially developing, it's also the rate of change is also exponential. And I think that's what's going to happen with everything that you're seeing kind of like in all the already spacefaring nations, as well as like nations that are wanting to be part of the space industry.
So Emmeline, and of course, anybody who's been in an electric car and just kind of, puts the pedal down knows that acceleration. So yeah, you can almost feel it in this conversation. Thanks for that. Well done. So we're going to start off some questions looking now at kind of the past to the current state. So if we think about kind of what's working and where we are today within your context, I want to explore a bit kind of what are some of the past opportunities and challenges that we've seen. And Xavier, I want to start with you because you, as far as an architect and working on architecture for things like space with so many different cross areas in the construction industry and the different sectors. What's been your experience in doing some of that design work and the value you've seen in some of the other sectors and integrating, but still having that space application? Like what's that been like, and what are some of the opportunities through that process that you've seen?
What do you mean the opportunities for me working in space, or kind of like having a background in architecture in a different industry?
Well, more so the opportunities in other sectors. So by applying that space lens, have you seen the benefits in different sectors from, because you showed some really incredible examples. Does the application of space then start providing some benefits as we start looking at everything from hospitals to kind of remote communities to those kind of things?
It's an interesting question. I would actually flip it completely upside down, and I would rather look at what space can learn from other industries, I think, because I feel that, stepping in from an architecture world, I've worked for more than 20 years in architecture and still am. I worked at some of the largest and prestigious buildings in the world and really difficult projects. And I'm not going to say it's a perfect world. Absolutely not. And sometimes our industry goes like, oh, maybe we should look at the space industry, this and that. And I don't think so, right? Because what we do in architecture is quite often, and this is from my own perspective, of course, and particularly in habitation design, is that we have designers in charge, right? We have designers, architects in charge who are not experts, right? We are not experts at all, right? And it seems to be that I find within the space industry, like it's full of experts in everything, right? But there's often people that are not experts that's really important who actually understands just little bits, I think, of everything. And I think that's where our role comes in as more of a conductor, right? And being able to come up with a global vision of things, right? And being able to visualize that. And that I kind of find a real issue in the space industry, that people actually are very bad at visualizing overall visions, right? Or ideas. And it often goes really directly into technology application really, really quickly without people actually seeing the overall view and the overall direction where we're all going. And I think as architects and designers, that's what we're good at, right? Giving that overall vision without having to know exactly how everything works. I'm very comfortable not knowing how everything works, you know? I do want to work then with engineers and scientists who are obsessed by that because stuff needs to work at the end of the day, right? So I believe there's like a different shift happening from my perspective that we could learn from other industries in the space industry, right? Because it goes very, very quickly, very technical, very detailed so often. It's that, or it's kind of high-level conversations that have no real kind of imagery attached to it or visions attached to it, I feel, you know. That's my perspective.
So a quick follow-up question then.
Yeah.
Are you seeing technology that's being developed in the space sector that is having direct applications on the other sectors, such as property sector, you know, satellite visualization for greening, or you know, things that are going that way? You mentioned before of applying, you know, traditional sectors to the space sector, but are you seeing things that are developed or coming out of the space sector that are then being applied to some of the other sectors, particularly within construction or architecture that you're working in?
Maybe yeah, maybe certain things, but it's not very, like, people always have this obsession by kind of having to show that space is valuable back on Earth, right? I don't think that's always necessary, right? We always have this obsession about it, right? Oh, we do space, but actually it's very valuable on Earth as well. Sometimes we just develop technology just for space. Like I have this weird thing where, you know, we've done 3D printing habitats on Mars, for example, right? The immediate reaction I always get, like, from people going, oh, wouldn't it be fantastic then to use this technology to build houses for homeless people? No, that would be the dumbest idea ever. Be a really stupid idea, because, you know, homelessness is not about buildings at the end of the day. And it would be also it's a technique it works really well on Mars potentially, but we have way better techniques on Earth. So I always kind of have quite a different view on it. I don't think we always need to be obsessed by kind of bringing technology back. It's okay just to develop stuff for space at the same time.
Can I add something?
Please
go for it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess that's one perspective, but also the other perspective here is that I think people take for granted what space has actually contributed to just like the general day-to-day life of everybody on Earth. I mean, from GPS to like navigation to you know, weather, when you look at weather like today, these are things that we just take for granted that you know, we think are not space related, but they were actually I mean, it's technology that you're using, and without satellites we won't have all of this technology. So I guess I just wanted to point out that there are things right now that I think people always think of the definition of space as, rockets and rocket ships when, for example, with the global space economy, like 75% of that is downstream. So which means that it's all applications, remote sensing, analysis, and data. And so we're just like, we're very visually looking at what space is showing us, which of course is launches and rockets. But the biggest part of that industry is actually, I guess, almost like flying under the radar, which is something that we always use.
I think the
And I think
challenge, sorry, I just want to add to that, because I think if you like space, then you're bought in, but you have to deal with all the other politicians that, would have to vote for a budget to make things happen. And most don't have the luxury of, I think, being an architect that could design space habitats for Mars. So I think if it was like a regular person on the street, they're trying to relate it back to them on Earth. Like they're like, okay, so how are my taxpayer dollars being used like on Earth? And that's the real justification these all space enthusiasts have to do when they go requesting for money, unless you find a billionaire to fund your hopes and dreams of building something in space.
Well, I think I just want to add to that a little bit. I think it's not always about a particular piece of technology or an application, I think. And for me personally, really, what it has done to me by working in space for the last 10 years or something like that, or partly in space, is it made me think much harder about how to design more sustainable on Earth, right? It's not about particular technology, it's not about a particular thing at all, but it's about an attitude towards design, right? And I've got lots of actually examples of what we've done. We've done collaborations with, and these are more kind of, provocative thoughts than anything else, but we've done collaborations with fashion designers, for example, to design clothes out of parachutes, because why wouldn't our Martian habitats not reuse their landing parachutes in something? Or looking at lots of ways of 3D printing furniture and stuff out of recycled plastics. That's something we do as well. So it's all about, I think, when we're really going to live in another planet, we're going to have to be so careful about all the materials we bring and how we reuse and readapt that and upcycle that many times over. And I think that's a really interesting one for me to kind of, it's more like a thought process that I bring back than technology.
Xavier, I want to maybe build on that. And only Stephanie, I love the kind of that perspective, and then particularly that 75% of the downstream value. Stephanie, I want to just throw to you and pull on that point that Xavier made, as far as going to space makes you think harder about the design, or makes you challenge yourself in a particular aspect. Maybe I'm touching on your broad experience with both engaging with government, but also as a space foodie, in the food and agriculture sector. What is it about space that would change the way you think about doing food on Earth, and vice versa, the ways of doing food on Earth? What does that mean for how we develop food and agriculture up in space?
Yeah, so that NASA Deep Space Food Challenge that is also partnered with the Canadian Space Agency and also offers an international prize. It's about creating a closed loop food system that can basically be very low maintenance and also provide maximum nutrients. And also in a pretty small portable size, because you need to probably put it in your spacecraft and have it go on a one-way trip to Mars. Ideally, I would say it would, last while you're on Mars as well. So you're not, I guess, gonna always be carrying, pockets of seeds, to be a farmer. While you have to do other experiments and steering the ship, to say. So I think when you think about that, like we also, I think about, then this could be applied back on Earth for the food systems, because that way more people get access to maybe higher nutrient foods that they could grow themselves or self-replenishing. At the University of Adelaide, they're looking at duckweed for maximum nutrients, and it sounds unique in the sense that it's your everyday looking pond scum, possibly, if you look at it from that perspective. Clearly, the university is not going to feed you that, whatever is off the river, but the way it propagates and multiplies so quickly, it is a good sustaining food source. And back in May, there was a Tasting Australia event where they had a Thai chef basically do a 3-course tasting on different ideas of infusing duckweed into the menu, because it was what he had growing up in Thailand, in a poorer region. And there's a lot of different foods like that we forget about, whether it's plant-based, even insect protein, which a lot of people are exploring as a sustainable product. I'm not sure how that's going to be growing on a trip to Mars if you want to introduce insects. But there's a lot of innovation, at least, that forces us to think a little bit differently about how we eat. And as you say, Xavier, like think about that reusability aspect that has more of that challenge. Just going back to even your design thinking, I crashed a ag tech conference in Adelaide, and I think the last day, like, I was mind blown, finally realizing all the decorations in the whole conference center were actually live plants. Because going to a space conference and also, talking to people about, even plans for space, they're like, do we need a real plant? Do we need a plastic plant? Or can it be replaced with like a green sheet of paper for mental health? So yeah, you can't have, engineers designing everything, because that's part of, like, we're not building for robots, ideally. We're building for humans.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
that's a really critical part.
Nobody should ever have plastic. That's my rule.
One of the criticisms that may come up for space is, we spend billions upon billions, if not trillions of dollars trying to get to Mars when we have so many challenges on Earth. But based on that line of thought, Stephanie, like, is that the design thinking that's needed, and the attitude for design, as Xavier put it, would that actually force us to be more sustainable on Earth? And if we didn't have that challenge, we may just keep consuming our way into not being on Earth anymore. Would that be fair?
Also, yeah, and I think the other thing also, I think people, and I get that question all the time, right? If I kind of present our space habitat project, I had it this weekend, last weekend I had it as well, at the Blue Dot Festival. I had the question, why send millions of people want to plan to inhabit Mars if we have so many problems here? My answer is actually kind of simple, and I can't blame Musk for this. Is people think we're going to another planet, that we're going to send thousands and thousands of people. I don't think that's ever going to happen, really, right? My analogy is always Antarctica, right? We have bases on Antarctica. We do it for research and exploration, and very important research happens there, and we need humans there to do that research. I believe that will be the same thing on the Moon and Mars. Will there be some level of tourism connected to that? Yeah, probably there will be, right? There will be other bits connected. But the way we live in Antarctica is very, very, we try to be extremely sustainable and light-footed on the surface of Antarctica as possible. And I believe that's what we need to do, I never want to design to have thousands of people live on another planet. No, hundreds maybe. But I don't think Mars and Moon are fantastic places to live anyway. We live in a perfectly good place. Got it for research? Yes, but not more than that.
Interesting. Emily, like, when you think about the work that you do, you're building entire ecosystems to get us on other planets and to explore and to leverage technology, then to bring it back down to Earth. when you hear kind of what Stephanie and Xavier have been talking about in terms of that whole process challenging our thinking, do you find that as you're building your ecosystems, and kind of what's been your experience on some of the applications that have been developed, either for space that you see the ecosystem then building towards other areas, and vice versa? And also, do you see a difference in the ecosystem you're building as compared to, say, the traditional innovation ecosystem, across different sectors? What's the difference?
That's a really great question, and I think it's multi-part. So, so for one, in terms of like ecosystem building, and as I mentioned before, we're really focused on developing in emerging countries, because the point here is to make sure that the entire world actually gets to play and have the opportunity to leverage space technology for for future, either as an industry for economic development, which is really the short term part of this, and then the kind of like settling and moving outside of the planet and going into the solar system is kind of like the more like long term version of it. But on your other question about what's the difference, I think most of the new players right now are certainly looking at creating space ecosystems like to solve more of their near-term sort of like challenges and problems. So which is why one of the things that we really focus on is really leveraging space technology for planet Earth. And so climate change, for example, is one of those problems that we all have a challenge, basically, regardless of what country or which kind of like level of development you are in the space industry. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity for these countries to really leverage space again to potentially solve the grand challenges that they have today. But also there's also what we're now calling dual use, but dual use not for military and defense, but dual use for like terrestrial purposes, as opposed to terrestrial purposes and space purposes. So I guess just one example here is there's one company here in New Zealand that their original focus was to create carbon negative cement, of which is really a big if they be successful, like cement is one of the biggest polluters on Earth, and if you can actually disrupt that, then that would really be a game changer for. But then at the same time, if you kind of like look at the up and coming like cislunar missions and economy, we need landing pads on the moon and Mars, because landing pads are going to be in a critical path for making sure that that there won't be any interference between like missions between countries, and that's on a critical path that is an example of an application that is maybe longer term, but has like really earth applications that are needed today.
I'd imagine that would take a kind of an ecosystem approach as well, because you have materials, you have supply chains, you have customers, you have government policy that applies to it, funding, grants, the whole thing.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I always think of the space industry as an industry is really an extension of every terrestrial industries. It's just an extension of an industry on Earth that is applied to extreme environments. And so every stakeholder, every facet of creating an industry has the same thing that's happening in the space industry.
I can't agree more with that, because we should stop thinking that suddenly there are space companies and they're not space companies, right? It's like every company, I think, can be involved in it. We should stop treating it as such a kind of very special, specialist thing. It's not, right? It's really not. And I often get the questions like, how, Xavier, do you design for space? How do you start? It's like any other building, really. It's just in a different place. The environment is very different. it's all a bit extremer and harsher. But you know, we deal with these things all the time. You know, like oh, but how do you get everything to the moon or Mars? And you need to think about it as well. If I build a building in central London, don't you think we actually designed the building so everything fits on trucks and is able to kind of like arrive on site in a certain way? And yes, of course we do. It's just all, it's the process is the same, I find, right? But we just have to think about it slightly differently. And I wish more industries would and more companies would actually be comfortable kind of entering the field of space.
I usually tell people like whatever you need on Earth, you also need in space. So maybe, yeah, if you want to become like a trash like collector, like you'll need that in space as well. And you know, all jobs are equal almost, unless you know ChatGPT writes you out. But and yeah, and I think that's a challenge with folks that are in the space industry. We love this industry so much. It's such a bubble. And like we love like it's you know we like love hanging out with each other, or we love drinking with each other, we love going to conferences around the world with each other, and it's like and it becomes very close knit, and you forget actually the real people you need to serve are actually out there. and that's the challenge, and that like we even use the word space in the leading word of every sentence, and we forget about that. And I had people, you know, I give people a challenge, like, can you talk about, you know, what you do like in the space sector without even using the word space in the leading sentence, or like justify why space is important without using that in the first sentence of every first word of every sentence. And it's hard, like, because we all drink this Kool-Aid, and it's comfortable, it's fun. Yeah, but we need to talk to more people out there.
I get a lot of the question by graduates who are graduate architects who love space, and they ask me the question, how do you become a space architect? How do I do this? What courses do I follow? What do I do? For me, the first thing is always don't try to become a space architect. First of all, try to become a good architect, right? And then work in space, because that's the most important thing, to be good at what you do, what your particular profession is, right? And I have lots of kind of space architects who then, or people trying to do space stuff, who want to become really, really technical, right? They want to almost become engineers. They go like, no. There's enough system engineers out there and all that we can use and kind of work with and collaborate with. We don't need to become more space, right? It's okay in the profession that you have, the experience and the knowledge that you have to bring to the space industry, without kind of being kind of, you know. But I agree, it's a quite close-knit organization that talks in certain ways, and I'm always quite against it. There's a reason I very explicitly do not call myself a space architect, you know, because I think I bring something different, and people have to deal with that.
If we take on that, I want to build on, like, across the three of you, we heard some excellent statements. An extension of the terrestrial industry. Every company can be a space company. What is a trash collector in space? This future type focus. We've talked about some of the challenges, some of the internal aspects of the space sector. I'm going to take about 8 minutes or so and look to the future and say, okay, if it could be anything as far as the space sector, space innovation ecosystem, how we develop this, including the integration between space and Earth. We think about from government policies to industry engagement to funding to focus. If you could change anything, if you could do anything and have any ideas or opportunities, say in the next 3 years, put a 3-year horizon on it. In 3 years, if you could have anything different than the way it is now, think about the vehicle that you described early on, think about the current context that we've gone through. If we go ahead 36 months from now, if you can see any change within the context that you're in relating to the space industry, what would that be?
I can start, I guess.
Go for it.
Well, I guess for one, across the board, regardless of whether you're a spacefaring nation or you're just like starting out, I think funding has always been the most kind of like sought after, regardless of and so there are different funding sources, and of course government plays a big role in this, especially for those that are just beginning. You really need the political will with the backing of funding to actually make it happen. And so if there's, and I don't know the answer to this, of how you can actually incentivize more of a government to have a more space leaning, have a good strategy for every country that would be interested in participating, and how can you then create those either through grants, through investment as a customer, to be able to help the nascent industry that is like trying to actually create this innovation. Because I think right now I can say so much as for New Zealand, and I think probably in Australia it's also the case, is that we need more funding for on the idea stage, where there's like startup companies that really need the help to get to an actual prototype, as opposed to just ideas. And so it's great right now that like statistically there's more diversity in funding, from VCs to like, I mean, it used to be just VCs and angels. Now there's even traditional funding sources like banks that are now beginning to actually look into the industry, when originally this is too much of a risky industry to actually look at. But I think that's just one thing. If there's any way that we can actually change how funding is being distributed to the industry, that would be fantastic.
So
Sorry. For
Sorry.
Stephanie.
So just to add on to what Emmeline said, what I've seen, at least in Australia, is it sounds like it's a reduction in grants and funding per se, but actually there was, so my background right now, or at least working at KPMG, was helping with grants and R&D tax incentives. Who knew I would be a rock star amongst tax people? But a lot of these space companies or those that label themselves as space companies, they only target space grants and space funding. And actually there was like a carbon soil detection type fund grant out there in Australia, and one random company won like 9.8 million, which is far out than most space companies would get any money from Australian government for, to build a satellite for doing some SAR activity. And it's not a space company, and they were not targeting a space grant, and that's how they got money. So that's I think funding is there. You just have to look differently with a different pair of lens. And of course, more is always better. But I'm just going to jump into this, answering this question. I think what we need is better direction, and almost, if I'm on a boat, I'd want some like light roads to know where I'm going. Because I think one thing that was really good in the previous US administration was they had a lot of space policy directives. They had a lot of movement. They had the Artemis Accords, and it helped, I think, give people that vision that, the architects can help, draw out, visualize as well. But I think when you're going out, I guess, into the ocean, I would imagine on this tiny little boat, ideally you'll have those little lights along that light up the path, and hopefully you see an island on the eventually, and that you can hit or land on. And that's what I think governments miss, not just a space strategy, but also weaving that future outlook that as part of the space technology into all the other agencies, not just the space agency, but the agriculture agent, the Department of Agriculture, like Weather Bomb is already doing that, but it can't just be a siloed activity.
Yeah, excellent. So yeah, absolutely, that integration, that leadership, the vision, the direction, kind of that true north, at least be able to guide our focus. That's good. Xavier, over to you.
Things I want to see changed, right? I think I do see change happening. I think 10 years ago, my first project was with more than 10 years ago, I think, was with ESA on their EMITS tender process, which was very, very painful for a non-space engineer to get into, right? And we kind of by accident fell into this research project, which was great. But I did see kind of a change happening at NASA and at ESA. At NASA, we got involved through their Centennial Challenges, which was on purpose kind of a way to expand the involvement of other types of companies into the space industry, which we picked up on. And then ESA in the last few years, they have a new funding system called the OSIP, Open Space Innovation Platform, where ESA doesn't really set a very specific what the research is, but they give a theme. Like it might be ISRU, in situ research utilization, as broad as that. And then let other companies and industry and universities to come up with ideas, and then they select the ones they think are valid. It's still limited funding. They're about 200,000 euros or something each time. These projects, we're doing 2 of those, which is great. But I do believe that needs to be larger. But I do think that approach is great because it kind of uses the creativity and the knowledge of a much wider group of industry that can get involved in space. And I think I'd love to see more of that. I've seen a shift happening in the last decade, but I would love more of that. And I would also love to kind of the bigger space engineering companies, to start thinking that way as well, right? Because they sometimes think very much only technology driven, right? And I think they need to think a little bit wider and involve different types of industries as well. I love sometimes the kind of the vertical integration to space industry, like what you have at SpaceX, for example. I think it's fantastic, but it does sometimes limit, and it becomes quite kind of focused, which is great if you want to have these really clear goals, but it does stop other kind of influences coming in, I think, as well. So more open approach, I would say.
Excellent, Xavier. And like all of those inputs from funding to direction and leadership and programs, corporate engagement, open approach, open innovation. Obviously we're going to be talking about all of that at the Global Entrepreneurship Congress in Melbourne. But it's also provided a good foil for someone I'm going to bring into the conversation that's been patiently waiting in the wings, Stefan. We're going to bring Stefan in here now just to share a little bit about what's happening with Jen, the Global Entrepreneurship Network's space arm as well, who's also helping facilitate and support some of these sessions we're having. So Stefan, hopefully you're ready. I'm just going to promote you to panelist and have you join us if you could.
Hey, good afternoon, good evening, and it's good morning for me. Thanks for the opportunity, Chad, to join this esteemed panel. I was pretty excited when I got promoted to be a panelist. I clicked all the buttons and jumped into the hoop. My name is Stefan Recchi. I'm the executive director of GenSpace. One of the things to really highlight is GenSpace is not a focus on the vertical for space, but we are looking at space as a location to do business. We really have 3 aspects of things that we're doing. We're trying to connect and leverage this borderless aspect of space, like the overview effect, connecting the entrepreneurs doing business in space, by also advising them. So we're looking at all the stakeholders. I know you guys talked about investors, so we're talking to investors and giving them some ideas or looking at why they should invest in space, what are the pitfalls. But realistically, our perspective is if we're not advising and connecting all the folks, it's not going to work. Everyone has to collaborate in space for space to be successful as a business. And then lastly, we do a lot with inspiring the future workforce to let them see and feel that there is an opportunity to create businesses in space. We're truly universal or global. We have connections in every continent. I have a strong advisory board, a strong board of directors, and I appreciate the opportunity to mention GenSpace on this call.
We're Stefan, and as well, while we have you on the horn, like you've obviously seen the progress, and we've been talking quite often coming up to Melbourne. You've seen some of the sessions that are emerging. What are you hoping to get out of the Global Entrepreneurship Congress in Melbourne this year, as you see what's forming, and you've heard a lot of the conversations that are leading up to it?
Well, I'm really excited that in this we've been to, I think, 4 or 5 GECs now as GenSpace, but in this one we're going to be reaching out to the ministerials and putting together a session to allow either ministers to be created for space or look at who in the organization and the government should be looking at space entrepreneurship. So that excites me, and also exciting that we're going to be reaching out to the thought leaders for investors. So I think I look forward to every GEC. It's kind of the United Nations or the super Congress for entrepreneurship. So excited to be part of it.
Excellent, thank you. And well, it sounds like you will single-handedly then address all of our challenges, from funding to programs to the corporate engagement to everything like. So we really appreciate your efforts there. And if you could just solve those by October, that would be amazing.
Oh, no problem. Yeah, easy task. way harder than I'm saying, but that's the exciting part is putting the effort behind it. And again, the passion, just listening to the panelists today, and the passion's there, and it's the opportunity's there, the timing's right. So all we have to do is just keep on spreading the word and watching what happens, because we are going to be a spacefaring society, and it's really important for us to be successful, to explore and to pioneer.
Can I add in a plug after the GEC for another space activity that's going to be going on in Australia?
Of course, Stephanie.
So the International Astronautical Congress, which is a global space congress that goes to different locations around the world. This year being in Baku, next year being in Milan. Australia will be hosting in the International Astronautical Congress in 2025 in Sydney. So around the September-October timeframe. So I know everyone's still in the year 2023, but just, mark your calendars as well for 2025, and hopefully there's continued progress.
No, that's amazing. Yeah, well, it takes a while to plan your trip to Australia. So, come over for 2023 for the GEC, go back and start planning for 2025 to come back and build on those connections you make in Melbourne. That'd be great. And what I will do is I will flash over, and I'm going to share a screen briefly. I'm going to show just a slide which has a QR code. And for those who are watching this and listening to this, hopefully you guys can see that okay. You can see the slides. Yes, good. So those are the specific space sessions, from how to build a space startup, how to approach investing in space companies, the role of government and space agencies and startup ecosystem development, along with the ministerial session, the fireside chat with Austrian keynote speaker Sarah Sabri, first Egyptian, Arab, and African woman in space. So it's something that if you have any interest at all, either in space or in investment or government policy or any facet of the ecosystem, which is very broad, and it's not just that, but it's the people that are going to be attracted to this. So we have everybody from people, helping with the visualization of satellite imagery for architecture, to greening of the earth, to addressing climate. Really, it's a great opportunity. And if you take a scan of that QR code that's up there now and enter a flash code of 25, flash 25, you will get 25% off before the 4th of August, just to reward those people that are going to be watching this video between now and then. The other thing I'm going to share briefly is about the Challenge app, which I mentioned before. If you go onto the Gen Australia website and go to the program under Challenge Collaborator, you'll see a link here to what we call the Nectar app. Within the Nectar app, we are setting up challenges for across all the sessions of the GEC, across the 70 to 90 or so sessions that we're having. And what you can do then is you can see these specific challenges that relate to a lot of the conversations we've been having now. You can put your ideas against those challenges. So you can see here, we have 5 challenges for the space sector initially: advancing the space sector technology capability, the space sector culture, communication, and awareness, space sector integration across industries and impact areas, and how do we engage across creative industries, health and life sciences, energy, mining, resources, climate, inclusion, and more. How do we unlock the private sector value in the space sector and that funding from the private sector, as well as the government space sector policy programs and funding as well. So you can see we really try to cover off on all the areas. Within any one of these, then what you can do is you can log in, see the details of the challenge, and then you can submit your idea. Once you do that, other people can join you on those ideas, and over the next 12 months after the GEC, really work together to try and solve those at a global level. So really trying to foster that engagement, integration. We talk about it being a Congress, not just a conference. If you're going there, you're going to be in a room with peers just like you, leading the way, learning from others, sharing with others, leading others, and to help everyone, including government, investors, researchers, entrepreneurs, all achieve their outcomes specific to that area, whether it's food and ag, creative industries, or in this aspect with space. So we'll be putting these links in wherever you're going to be seeing this video on how to access both the challenge statements. If you are watching this, the super secret flash 25 for a 25% off, which isn't insignificant. And we really hope to see you guys there. Before I leave, though, just want to again thank the panelists so very much for hopping on. Thank you very much for the attendees and for the bits of chat that we've had. And I might just go around the room and just for one last say for everybody here, including Stefan, if you could say maybe 2 to 3 words for what you would hope for out of the GEC, specific to the space sector, having all these people come together, what would that 1 to 3 or 4 words be? What would you be most looking forward to out of the GEC? Xavier, I might start with you.
Oh, gosh, always start with me. I think for me, it would be to kind of meet a more diverse set of industries getting involved in the space industry.
Excellent, thank you. Emmeline?
International collaboration.
Beautiful. Stephanie?
You took both of mine, but essentially, I really want cross-pollination, connecting space and non-space sectors together.
Excellent. And Stefan, one last time.
Harnessing the energy of entrepreneurship.
Beautiful, love it. Excellent. Well, I'm very much looking forward to seeing you and everybody watching this in Melbourne. And thank you so much. Have a good morning, good night, good day. And thank you very much.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Bye.